This time we're talking about some things that many beginners think are very important in game design, but are not. Ideas, innovation, stories. Ideas are just the start of a game. Publishers don't want game ideas, they want complete games. Anybody can get an idea. Every gamer has game design ideas, and there's a disdain for it. Quote, game ideas are like buttholes. Everyone has one and most of them stink. Unquote. Now, when you get an idea, you probably think it's really great, but that's partly because it's your idea. And you may also think that it's unique. But in reality, probably 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 people have had the same idea. There is nothing new under the sun. And that's the problem with game ideas, and the reason why they are individually regarded as worthless, because so many people have the same ideas. So to summarize that, a quote from a movie: strictly speaking, there's no such thing as invention, you know. It's only magnifying what already exists. And that's what game designers do. They take what already exists and use it in new ways, or magnify it, as Ali Fox said, to make it something that is different to the experience of most of the players. Consequently, even though individual ideas are not worth much, it's important to get lots of ideas so that you have some good ideas, some usable ideas out of all the ones that you get. And in order to get lots of ideas, you have to work at it. You don't want to be waiting for ideas to just float in sometime and strike you, because you won't get many that way. If you work at it, you'll get a lot more ideas. You have to think, I'm going to get an idea for a game. Sometimes it'll happen, sometimes it won't. But it'll happen more often than if you just go on about your business and wait for an idea to show up. And when you read things, or play games, or watch movies, or do anything in your life, in the back of your mind you've got to be thinking, is there something I can use in a game in this? And then you must write it down. Even in medieval times, when memories were a lot better, people didn't remember everything. Nowadays, people have CRS, can't remember stuff. So you need to write it down, or there's a good chance you're going to lose it. And when you write it down, you really need to have it backed up. So generally, game designers should use computers to write down their ideas and then back them up somewhere else. If you use a program like Evernote and have it sync between, say, a smartphone and a desktop, then you've got the stuff in two places. But you still need to back it up as well, because you'll be very unhappy if suddenly your idea store, whatever it is, whether it's on paper or on a computer, is lost, and you've lost so many ideas that you had accumulated over the years. And I don't make too many absolute statements in this class, although it may sound like it, but I'm going to make this absolute statement. If you won't write down your ideas, you'll never amount to anything as a game designer. Now, what about stories? Game designers design games, not stories. In fact, in video games, where sometimes there's a complex story, usually a story writer is hired to write the story. The game designer doesn't write it. So if you're really into stories, maybe you want to become a game writer and not a game designer. Stories do help sell games, but stories are not why people keep playing games. In fact, in some cases, they play the game, they learn the story, and then they're done. It's the gameplay, what the players are doing while the game goes on, that keeps them playing the game again and again. John Carmack, who is famous for programming Doom and many other FPSs and other games, famously said story in a game is much like story in pornography. It's an excuse to get to the action. Nowadays we're having a lot more cinematic kinds of games. Games where some people don't actually particularly want to play the game, they just want to experience the story. Nonetheless, the game designers are not generally the people who make those stories, it's game writers. In general, however, games are weak for stories because they're not linear. Other kinds of stories, which are essentially passive, are linear. The writer of the novel or the writer of the play or the writer of the movie has full control over what happens. The consumer, the player if you will, can't do anything to change it. In a game, the player can change what goes on, and that makes it harder to write a really good story. Now, every game has a narrative, which is an account of what happened. But of course, there's a narrative in you driving to the grocery store. It's just one that few people, if any, would be interested in. I'm talking about formal stories where you have characters and conflict and climaxes and so forth that characterize formal stories. Many games do not have that, and it's difficult to put it into a game because the player can change what happens. Now, another delusion that beginning game designers have is that all they have to do is get a few ideas and somebody else will do all the work. No, nobody's going to do it for you, especially when you're an aspiring designer. Making a game is work. Most everyone wants to make their own games. People only work on other people's games when they get paid for it. Why would they work on your game? They think theirs is better. So you have to make your own game. Unless somewhere you find funding so that you can pay somebody else to make your game. But still, in the terms of game design, you have to work out exactly what the game is about, modify it as things go on, decide how it's going to work, and bring it to a state where you think it's worth marketing and publishing. Nobody else is going to do that for you. So, when you're quite experienced in making games, then you can worry about stories. For now, make games, not stories. Focus on what the player does. What is the player going to do?